I want to thank all of you for being here, but I especially want to thank our Mayor Muriel Bowser, and I want to thank our other speakers for joining us. We're not in this alone, and you will understand that as you hear from our speakers. Because we are here, you want to know what the subject matter here? It's not all about the District of Columbia, it's all about but the problem continues, even with the progress we are making on DC statehood. We do have one frustration. Most Americans, with all we do to make it clear, do not know that the 700,000 Americans who live in the District of Columbia, their nation's capital, don't have the same rights that they have. And if you want to know what really hurts, they don't know that we, not they, are number one in federal taxes that support the United States of America. Well, they may feel there's something wrong when they see the appropriation process. Today, we have some of our friends whose work attracts Republicans to try to overturn what our DC Council and our mayor have indicated that they desire. We are welcoming and will be having remarks from NARAL, Pro-Choice America, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, DC Vote, and Compassion and Choices. I'd also like to thank our coalition partners who are here today, because what we have to do is, because there's so many allies we have, we change up on who gets to speak on these bills, which are repeatedly these briders, as we call them, these undemocratic amendments, who gets to speak up this time. So we're pleased to have partners who have spoken in the past and who have continued to work with us. Human rights representatives from the Human Rights Campaign, Catholics for Choice, all above all, DCMJ, the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence, Planned Parenthood, the National Partnership for Women and Families, and the National Cannabis Association. We thank all of you for being here and for lending your expertise to us as we fight to defend the democratic, with a small d, integrity of the District of Columbia. You would think there would be fewer attacks this year. But we've got to look at what we saw last year, and the attacks continue to come. There is something that's very different, a major change-up, and that, of course, is that the House of Representatives is now controlled by the Democratic Party. Last year, the Republicans took their best shot with an unusual number of amendments. For example, bills to strip D.C. of all its gun safety laws. And you know, not one has been filed on that score so far this year. Of its Death with Dignity Act, an attempt to fund private schools with local D.C. money. And we were able to keep all of that from being enacted when Republicans controlled the House. Now that Democrats who believe in democracy control the House, we will, with these amendments, be almost assured of no enactment. We really want to thank our good friend, Chairman Elijah Cummings, who is the chair of the House Oversight Committee that has some continuing oversight over the District of Columbia, because he's agreed to eliminate the subcommittee that bears the name DC Subcommittee. So there's no place to go there. As the appropriations period begins in earnest on Monday, we are confident we can secure what we call a clean appropriation bill in the House, and I will say a bit about what it means to have an appropriation bill here at all. So if we're so confident that we're going to get a clean bill out of the House, what in the world are we doing here this morning? Look, Republicans still control 2/3 of the federal government. The Republican House members continue to introduce anti-home rule amendments. I mean, they're already in. They're just waiting for the appropriation process. For example, one on education, that's a vouchers bill. And I should indicate that the District of Columbia has the largest, I believe, in the country alternative to its public schools. And yet they continue to put a voucher bill or try to place a voucher bill on us. One already filed against the district's Reproductive Health Non-Discrimination Act, one against marijuana, two on health care, three on abortion. That's already, what are we into, the 4th month of the new House of Representatives? We intend to keep them all from passing the House. So they know that. They know they don't control. So why are they doing that this year? Why are they coming even in those numbers? Well, they don't even try to hide it much. They believe that if you attack our progressive city, they will get financial contributions. They think they will be satisfying special interests. And they think that because they come from very conservative districts, they will be raising their conservative profile at home. We are very fortunate that our coalition is not in the least bit intimidated. They understand that the DC budget is the vehicle that will be used by these anti-democrats. But democratic control for the first time in 8 years, is it? Gives us our best opportunity to make the case for the slogan you will see around town, hands off DC. And we intend to take full advantage of House control, democratic control of the House. In fiscal year 2019, 2 riders were enacted, despite our successes in getting most of those so-called riders off. One, prohibiting the district from spending its local funds on abortion for low-income women, as almost 20 states do. You can't spend local funds. One, prohibiting commercializing recreational marijuana. The Republicans aren't very smart. They tried to wipe out the district bill to allow any use of marijuana in the District of Columbia. When I say they aren't very smart, they just didn't succeed. They were able to keep us from commercializing marijuana, which 11 states do, but they didn't know how to keep people from smoking marijuana. So 2 ounces are legal in the District of Columbia. The problem with that is the district can't regulate it, can't commercialize it, so we've got more than one hand tied behind our back. Those are the 2 that are still on our appropriation. Today, our coalition will speak to these and to others that Republicans have placed. on our, or will place. It hasn't happened yet, but they've been introduced. Yes, we are emboldened by past successes when Republicans controlled the House and the Senate. And by the way, you don't hear me speaking that much of the Senate because that's where I get our work done. I go to the Senate, and I should explain that the Senate is less interested in each of these amendments because they represent entire states. So they could be offending constituents that they need, whereas the House represents a more narrow spectrum, and therefore they think they have nothing to lose. So we're going to show them they have a lot to lose. When we control the House, to show you why we are emboldened, particularly now the Democrats control the House, I will cite you the example of our neighbor, the only Republican in the state of Maryland, Representative Andy Harris, who couldn't resist wanting to block the DC law regulating the labeling, now watch this, of wet wipes used for safe fleshing. So why did he do that? That's an invitation to make fun of him. If he would, pardon me, stoop so low. So we shamed him endlessly for this bare-faced handout to the corporation that makes wet wipes, and he ultimately withdrew the amendment. So no member who seeks to interfere with the district is going to get a free pass. And particularly if they file insulting and demeaning amendments like that. Yeah, Republicans have not given up, and we didn't expect them to give up. And the best example of that is their quite insulting response to H.R. 1. You may recognize H.R. 1 as the comprehensive democracy bill of the House of Representatives that, quiet as it's kept, would say to Americans in many ways, you still don't have democracy, and we want to, now the Democrats control, make sure that democracy is full. Well, H.R. 1 was contained in that, and H.R. 1 is very important to what we're saying today because H.R. 1 is the first time in 218 years that either house has endorsed statehood for the District of Columbia, because statehood is in H.R. 1. So you would think they would leave that alone. What are they going to do about that? They're in the minority. Instead, there was a response filed to H.R. 1 on what H.R. 1 did for the district in particular. It was filed by Representatives Gozar of Arizona and Meadows of North Carolina. And this is what their resolution says. It is the sense of Congress that the Congress is the proper, constitutionally mandated sovereign over the District of Columbia, and that increasing congressional oversight of the district is a wise course. By the way, nobody has tried to increase recently, except with these riders. In particular, improving disapproval mechanisms of the Home Rule Act to ensure that poor municipal ordinances made by the congressionally provided and congressionally revocable authority provided to Washington, D.C.'s municipal government can be expeditiously overturned by Congress. And there's another section says, just to be gratuitous about it, the District of Columbia should never become a state. That's what we're fighting here. People who never give up, even when they've lost the House of Representatives. Together, those who join us and whom you will be hearing from shortly are helping the district maintain the integrity of the Home Rule Act. Of course we're fighting for statehood, which would render what we have to do today and what we're going to have to do on the floor impossible, because we would be like every other state. Yet even without statehood, existing law, and our amendments go to existing law, entitle the district to an equal seat at the table under the Home Rule Act, enacted before I ever thought about coming to Congress in 1973. So we intend to press the law as it exists today to its limit, at the same time that we are simultaneously demanding to become the 51st state of the United States. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce now the mayor of our city, who always comes to make the point that this is where the city stands, Mayor Muriel Bowser.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be here today with our Congresswoman, Eleanor Holmes Norton, and members of our coalition who have been so helpful in amplifying nationally the points that we press here today. I want to also congratulate the Congresswoman on the great work that she does despite the type of opposition that you've heard. Much of her work, of course, is focused on making sure that DC values as expressed by our DC Council and my office are upheld here. A lot of her work is defensive, but she and her team spend a lot of time on the offense as well, making sure that she is getting every bit out of the federal government to support the District of Columbia. We don't ask for more than our fair share. We know that we pay more than we get. We're larger than 2 states, pay more taxes than 22 states. We send our residents to war. We uphold our end of the bargain for American citizenship, and we just expect to be treated equally. The Congresswoman's job is also to use her considerable powers of her office to ensure that the federal land in our district is used to the benefit of DC residents. And that's why we have been able to transform DC's waterfront St. Elizabeth's campus to attract jobs and economic development and housing, why soon we will use our local dollars to make the federal government's parks better in our central district, and there are other things that we will continue to work on as well. We know well the objections to DC statehood. It used to be that people said that we weren't ready for statehood because we couldn't take care of ourselves. Well, we have proven them wrong, haven't we? Our city, county, state has proven to be self-sufficient. We run better than most jurisdictions, and last year we achieved a AAA bond rating and totally clean audits. DC residents, as I mentioned already, live up to every obligation of citizenship, including fighting to defend our country. Yet and still, we are denied the basic benefit of paying our taxes, and that is to have a vote in both houses of Congress. And we continue to face really what is very offensive, not just the actual facts of paying and not getting a vote, but constantly being attacked by representatives from other parts of the nation who question our ability to express ourselves and live our own destiny in our city. Despite these actions, we continue to show up every day for DC residents. Right now, I have a balanced budget before the Council of the District of Columbia that reflects our values, not those of Mr. Meadows or the people of North Carolina, but of DC. It took a lot of time to craft drafted. We held engagement forums. The council right now is debating it. And in every budget process, there are pushes and pulls, but at the end of the day, we will abide by what our elected officials have voted unanimously or in a majority to support. Our council members, not legislators from far-flung parts of the country, are the elected officials who should not only review that budget, but review every single law of the District of Columbia. The current riders block our city from spending our own dollars on abortions for low-income women and commercializing recreational marijuana. These riders are not only undemocratic, but they are deeply harmful. Particularly dangerous were attempts to interfere with our local ACA exchange and repeal our individual health insurance mandate, which DC, like many states, implemented to achieve universal coverage. We are grateful to the Congresswoman for fighting to keep these riders off, and we are looking forward to a clean appropriations bill in the House. We are grateful for the Congresswoman's leadership, her partnership with the Speaker of the House and the chairs of the various committees that affect DC. And despite this existing marijuana rider, you have heard me speak clearly about this. We regard this as a significant public safety issue for the district. We are in the terrible predicament of having marijuana use, personal use and growth at home by adults be legal in the District of Columbia, but we do not have the ability, or any of our residents have the ability, to procure that marijuana legally. So we will be proceeding on local action related to marijuana commercialization, just like every other jurisdiction in our nation has the ability to decide what's best for public safety in their communities. So today our message is the Congresswoman's message. Instead of interfering with our local laws and affairs, focus on the federal issues that is the Congress's business, and keep your hands off of the rest. We encourage the Congress to focus on addressing the growing backlog of DC Superior Court nominees, which is a critical public safety issue for us. We encourage the Congress to focus on passing the Congresswoman's bill to win a win for the federal government, and that is to fully convey the RFK Stadium campus to the district. That will help us generate new housing, jobs, economic development, and tax revenue. And to focus on fully funding the overwhelmingly bipartisan DC TAG program that the Congresswoman has been able to secure for us, that has allowed scores of DC residents to afford college. We are fortunate that the Congresswoman's mind is focused on DC statehood always, focused on fully realizing home rule for the District of Columbia in the meantime, but also being very strategic and working with her House colleagues and her partners in the Senate to keep riders off of DC. This is a critical issue for our self-determination and for our self-respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser. The Congress should be proud to have a nation's capital of the kind you lead, and the House will show you that we are. Now, we are very fortunate that we're not in this alone, and so I'm going to ask those who've been helping us, who are representative of those who've been helping us, to speak now. Kate Ryan of NAREL Pro-Choice America will speak about efforts to protect the district's Reproductive Health Non-Discrimination Act. She'll tell you what that's about. It prohibits employers in D.C. from discriminating against employees and their spouses and dependents based on their reproductive health decisions. You might ask, why would your employer even know anything about it? Well, it might be insurance, for example, might make him know something about it. But that is legislation we have successfully defeated in the past, but it has been a kind of magnet. I'm not sure anything has been introduced so far to take it out, but that is why we conduct a fight, a proactive fight on bills like that. Kate will also discuss the most long-lasting prohibition that we have, and that is the bar on DC funds for abortion for low-income women. This has been the most difficult of the two riders. Kate Ryan.
Thank you, Congresswoman Norton. Hi, I'm Kate Ryan. I'm the Legislative Director at NARAL Pro-Choice America. And along with our partner organizations here today, on behalf of our 2 million member activists, I want to thank you, Congresswoman Norton and Mayor Bowser, for your incredible leadership on behalf of the nation's capital. At NARAL, we believe that no woman's constitutional right to abortion should depend upon her zip code, her income, her source of insurance, or her employer. However, anti-choice lawmakers in Congress who are not accountable to the residents of the district apparently like to moonlight as members of the DC City Council, especially when it comes to restricting our reproductive freedom. For decades, they have hijacked the appropriations process to interfere with DC's home rule by including anti-choice poison pill riders that harm the women of DC. In one case, as Congresswoman Holmes Norton referred to, they banned DC from using its own local dollars to provide low-income residents with access to abortion care, something that the other 50 states can choose to do with their local funds, and many do. Although in some years, as recently as 2010, pro-choice champions have succeeded in lifting this abortion ban, unfortunately, currently, it is in place, and NARAL strongly supports a financial services and general government appropriations bill that does not include the DC abortion ban, because the women of DC should have insurance coverage for the full range of health care that they may need. In addition, in more recent years, anti-choice Republicans have tried to use the appropriations process 100% of the time unsuccessfully in this case, to block a DC law that protects women from being fired by their bosses for using birth control or being pregnant and unmarried. That happens. And even going so far as to hold a House floor vote to block this law. Thankfully, our champions in the House, including the Congresswoman, have protected the Reproductive Health Non-Discrimination Act, and that rider has never gone into effect. NARAL strongly urges that the appropriations process be free of these ideological riders that interfere with DC's home rule. Congresswoman, Mayor Bowser, our nationwide network of more than 2 million activists and our pro-choice allies here today stand with you and are ready to fight for the women of DC. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, we got that abortion rider off once when the Democrats were in power, and it came right back when the Republicans took over the House again. So this time we're going to keep the House and keep it off, but that is the one. But by the way, we already have 3 anti-abortion amendments of various kinds already in the first 4 months of this Congress. We're going to ask Justin Streckel of the National Organization for Marijuana Reform, NORMA, to discuss the rider blocking DC from spending its local funds on commercializing marijuana.
Hello, my name is Justin Streckel, and I'm the political director for NORMAL, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. First off, I want to thank Congresswoman Eleanor, Holmes Norton, and Mayor Bowser for their tireless championing of the values and interests of the citizens of Washington, D.C. As a resident myself, thank you. I also want to acknowledge the other advocates in the room. I want to thank DCMJ, who is here, who was instrumental in passing Initiative 71. And I also want to thank the National Cannabis Industry Association, who's instrumental in representing the interests of small businesses around the country. 4.5 years ago, the residents of the District of Columbia passed Initiative 71 overwhelmingly. And it was passed with the understanding that City Council, who was ready, willing, and able to implement a sensible regulatory framework for the distribution of marijuana to adults over the age of 21. This was voted on, again, overwhelmingly by the residents. It was supported by the city council. It was supported by community leaders. And unfortunately, a certain member of Congress from Maryland decided that he was a member of the city council as well, and he decided to interfere in the appropriations process. This is detrimental to the city for multiple reasons. One, people smoke marijuana in Washington, D.C. I don't know if you've heard. But when it comes to consumer safety in an unregulated marketplace, consumers do not know what it is they're purchasing. They don't know who it is they're purchasing it from. We don't have accountability when it comes to the products that are being distributed. If we want to best control, if we want controls to ensure the safe manufacture, production, and distribution of cannabis, then it must be regulated. It also deprives the city of being able to have necessary controls to prevent the divergence of marijuana to those under the age of 21. Street dealers do not have an incentive to check IDs. Regulated businesses do. It also is detrimental for law enforcement's priorities. Under the confusion of what's commonly known or regarded as the gray area and what is I-71 compliance, there is a lot of confusion, and there are a lot of community calls to law enforcement out of concern regarding the unlicensed distribution of adult-use cannabis. It is imperative that our law enforcement officers have the ability to prioritize their time to address the actual needs of our community and not have to waste their time worried about small entrepreneurs who desperately want to enter this marketplace in a legal and regulated framework. And it also is detrimental to basic community development. I'm sure Mayor Bowser would love to have additional funds in city coffers to reinvest, particularly in the areas that have the legacy of racial disparities in the targeting of law enforcement and the arrests of our brothers and sisters of black and brown skin. And it is essential that when the city legalize marijuana and regulate it in such a manner that some of those tax dollars that are generated be reinvested into those communities who have been most marginalized. Lastly, it's detrimental to the will of the voters, both here in the District of Columbia and around the country. As Americans come to our nation's capital to see the sights, to meet with their lawmakers, to see our beautiful museums and all of the history that comes with it, they come armed with the understanding that cannabis has been legalized here in the District of Columbia. They come under that understanding and they call my office and they ask what our hours are. And we have to regularly say, we are not a dispensary. Unfortunately, there are no lawful dispensaries here in the District of Columbia. I wish you the best. This leads people to continue to go to the underground marketplace by not having social consumption lounges. This allows for, this perpetuates the incidence of individuals consuming in public spaces. And it's just, again, undermining the intention and the will of both DC residents and the DC city government. Recently, Prime Minister Trudeau, while recounting his evolution on how he came from decriminalization to supporting the outright legalization and regulation of cannabis, told the story of a constituent meeting that he had when he was just a lowly MP. And I'm very proud of this, it was a member of Normal Canada, who walked into his office and said, Al Capone would have loved it if alcohol was only decriminalized. That is the state that our nation's capital is in. It is thriving an underground marketplace that desperately needs transparency. It desperately needs sensible pro-consumer regulations, and it desperately needs reform now. This debate has been settled. It is time for Congress to get out of the way. It is time for Representative Andy Harris to get out of the way, and it is time to bring a victory home for our nation's capital. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin, and I also want to thank our city, which I think had pending a law to a marijuana law, a law to free the district from restrictions on marijuana, when two civil rights organizations, I believe they were the Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights and the ACLU, came forward with a study that showed that in the District of Columbia, and by the way, this is true nationwide, almost all of those who are arrested are people of color. In the District of Columbia, I think the figures were something like 90%. So that means that I think I know the reason why. If you go to areas where there may be more crime than in other areas, you will see more cops. So if the cops can just arrest anyone, and that's what their job is, and they see people smoking, then they arrest them. So you get these hugely disproportionate figures. I'd like to ask Kim CALLINAN of Compassion and Choices to speak on anti-DC attacks on our medical aid in dying law, the Death with Dignity Act, which we have successfully defended in the past, but is also another magnet for Republicans.
Thank you, Congressman Norton and Mayor Bowser, for your leadership on behalf of DC statehood and on end-of-life choice. My name is Kim CALLINAN, and I am the CEO of Compassion and Choices. While I am always delighted to join this esteemed group, I am feeling a bit like I am in the middle of a Bill Murray movie. Does anybody else feel like we're in Groundhog Day? While I make a joke of it, this is a very serious issue. I'm here on behalf of the terminally ill residents of Washington, D.C., who simply seek peace and autonomy at the end of life. This is an option that they should have realized over 2 years ago when the D.C. City Council overwhelmingly, with an 11-2 margin, passed the D.C. Death with Dignity Act, and then Mayor Bowser very promptly signed it into law. This act quite simply gives a terminally ill resident with a prognosis of 6 months or less to live the option to request a prescription medication that they can take to end their suffering if it has become unbearable. It is an option that they should have realized when 2/3 of DC residents supported this option according to public opinion polling data. This was an example of the DC Council and the mayor listening to the wishes of their constituents and voting it into law. It was an example of democracy working, a rare example nowadays. But unfortunately, that is not when the story ended. Since the time this law has been enacted, we have withstood relentless attacks by the opposition in the form of riders each and every appropriations process. Each and every appropriations process, we have been here attempting to give the residents of Washington, D.C. the peace of mind that they deserve and that this legislation should have afforded them. While we have withstood those attacks, unfortunately, it has come at a cost. When the D.C. resident is terminally ill, and instead of knowing that they're going to have access to this prescription medication, they live in constant fear that Congress is going to rip the rug out from underneath them. They are not experiencing the peace of mind that this legislation should afford them. Fortunately, some D.C. residents have been successful at using this option that the council and the mayor enacted. Some of you might remember terminally ill resident Mary Klein. She was the advocate for the passage of this legislation and the implementation of it. She unfortunately suffered for years with ovarian cancer. And last year, after there were no more treatment options that remained that would support her and allow her to realize comfort and peace and have some level of quality of life, she decided that the time had come to take the prescription medication that she was allowed to take under this law. And she died peacefully in her sleep with her loving partner of over 30 years, Stella, by her side. Mary serves as a reminder of what this law is all about. It's about allowing somebody who is at the very end of their life with no available options the dignity and the autonomy to end unbearable suffering. It's an option that the DC residents want. It's an option that has been enacted into law, and it's an option that they should deserve. And it's time that we make the Congress stay out of the DC residents and the DC laws and let the DC residents realize this option untethered and free from interference. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kim. And I believe the national statistics show that most people who have this right, who states give them this right, do not in fact use it. So you can imagine the comfort this means to people to know that their life is in their own hands, and that's really what this means. And so we're looking for a possible rider, but we think your hard work will help us keep this rider off again. Now, the last speaker is not last in our mind because she's going to talk about the continued disenfranchisement of our city and why we therefore must have statehood for the District of Columbia. And I'm very pleased to welcome now Barbara HELMICK.
Thank you. Thank you to our duly elected officials, our mayor, our congresswoman for having us here. And thank you to you all for the work that you do. I mean, this is what democracy is all about. We elect people in hopes that they're going to listen to what we want. And if we don't think they're listening well enough, we organize and we come up with ideas and we bring them forth. And we have democracy. This is what democracy looks like, except for the reason that we're here today. This system that allows the injustice of anybody in the Congress to step in and undo what we're working to do, it's a stain on a beautiful system. I love America. I love America because I love democracy. This is an injustice clearly to those of us who call DC home. 40 years on the same street, by the way. It's an injustice to those of us who live here. It's an injustice to every American who loves this country because they love democracy. This system that allows members of Congress who are to be working on major issues of national concern, whose the decisions that they make have an impact across the entire planet. It is an injustice to their constituents that any one of them takes any time away from their staff, from themselves, because they're going to research whether wet wipes should be counted as flushable when they're not. This is an injustice to those constituents who elect them to care about what's going on in their district. It's an injustice to every American who cares about what we do with world policies, the decisions that these Congress people make, where they're noodling around on what are we doing with cannabis reform while other states are roaring forward on sensible policies. Now, reasonable people can disagree on these particular issues. That's what democracy is about, though. So it's unfair to us, but it's unfair to everyone. This makes our campaign for statehood an American issue. It is not just a partisan issue. This is an issue that every American has a dog in this fight. So we come together. Think about if we were to expand this system, where any member of Congress, let's say, they love to say, oh, DC, you're too small. They used to say Alaska was too big. They used to say Hawaii was too far. Well, how about if we just say any member of Congress, any state that says maybe 1,000,000 people or less, there's 6 of us, let's start saying anybody in Congress, go tell the Alaska legislature, that stuff that we thought you had too much land to be a state. So we're going to start telling you what to do. We're going to start telling Hawaii because they were too far. Chaos. Even this creates a chaos in the system of democracy that I think everyone in this room feels proud. Our founders invented this creative, wonderful form of government, and this is an abuse of that system. So I call on every American who's proud of our system of government and work with us to end this system. Like many forms of discrimination, the problems in the system. End the system by granting us statehood. We are following the path that every other territory followed. We've appealed to our populace. We've got our state constitution. We had a referendum. 86% said yes. We've got, hello. Thank you to our mayor getting that going. We have 203 co-sponsors in the House. We have 33 in the Senate. We will win statehood when every American recognizes this is their fight too. So we stand before you, those of us, the people of DC. We are powered by a love of democracy with a passion for justice. That's what our cause for statehood is about. Powered by a love of democracy with a passion for equality, because that's what this is all about. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara, for ending us on the high note of statehood. Are there any questions for any of our speakers? Thank you very much for coming.